During this unit, we have been spending a lot of time zooming in on really specific moments of text to try and pull out a key idea or an important central idea from the scene. A lot of times, what teachers train you to do, which makes a lot of sense, is always tie your interpretations to evidence, specific details from the story, quotations. That makes a lot of sense. You can only interpret what the book says, what the text says. Today, what we're going to look at, though, is something a little bit different, which is while you can and should look at what the text says, you also can look at what it doesn't say. And you can really try to do this through questioning. When you read something and you're kind of confused or you feel like something is unclear, that's often a good hint that you're at a place of meaning. It could be the text is just badly written, but for well-written texts, moments of questioning really suggest something important. So what we want to do during this lesson is focus on what is not there. Sometimes what the author does not directly say is the larger clue to meaning than what the author does say. Okay, so I'm going to show you this through a scene in Lord of the Flies, which is what we're working on during this unit. For those of you who don't know or don't remember, Lord of the Flies is the story of a bunch of boys getting stuck on an island alone after their plane crashes. And there are two kind of boys who stand out as potential leaders, Jack and Ralph. Ralph ultimately becomes the leader because he has the conch, which is this shell he uses to sound like a horn or a trumpet, and it just makes all of the children there kind of believe he has this authority. And you can only speak when you're in the group of these kids making decisions. If you're holding the conch, it ends up being this good tool to kind of create order out of the chaos of a bunch of boys being stuck on an island. But Jack does not like Ralph's authority. Jack has kind of a lot of presence himself, and he challenges it, as in this scene. So we're going to read it here. It says that Jack's face swam near Ralph. He says, "You shut up. Who are you anyway, sitting there telling people what to do? You can't hunt. You can't sing." "I'm chief," says Ralph. "I was chosen." "What should choosing make any difference? Why should choosing make any difference? Just giving orders that don't make any sense. Piggy's got the conch." So Piggy is Ralph's kind of sidekick who is almost as much a leader as Ralph is. He should be the only one speaking right now according to the rules. Jack doesn't like that. He says, "That's right, favor Piggy as you always do." "The rules," shouted Ralph. "You're breaking the rules." "Who cares?" Jack says. Ralph summoned his wits. "Because the rules are the only thing we've got." But Jack was shouting against him. "Bollocks to the rules. We're strong. We hunt. If there's a beast, we'll hunt it down. We'll close in and beat, beat, and beat." He gave a wild whoop and leapt down to the pale sand. At once the platform was full of noise and excitement, scrambling, screams, and laughter. Jack has this group of kids. They were all in the choir together back home, and they kind of follow him. So he leaves. Piggy then says, "What's grown-ups going to say? Look at 'em. Blow the conch, Ralph. You got to be tough now. Make 'em do what you want." "If I blow the conch and they don't come back, then we've had it," Ralph responds. "We shan't keep the fire going. We'll be like animals. We'll never be rescued." Now, what you need to understand is Jack and Ralph both have two different aims. Jack wants to hunt and bring food, which is obviously important. But Ralph has a plan, which is to create a fire that is big enough to create a signal in the sky so that they get rescued. The other kids don't want to do that work because they don't see the immediate benefit of it. So it's this struggle between Jack and Ralph over what everyone should be doing. But as I'm reading this scene here, I have this question. Why is Ralph against blowing the conch here, as Piggy suggests he do? Piggy wants him to blow the conch, tell Jack's group not to walk away, that they're not allowed to, that they have to follow the rules, they have to focus on the fire. Why would, as Ralph said, they be like animals if they don't come back? So it's this moment here. If I blow the conch and they don't come back, then we've had it. We shan't keep the fire going. We'll be like animals. We'll never be rescued. I'm not getting this because what Piggy says is usually pretty smart, and here Ralph disagrees with him. And if I really think about the moment, it just seems that Ralph is afraid. And the author, through this dialogue, is not quite having Ralph tell Piggy exactly what he means. Um, Clearly, he's worried they won't come back, but why does that mean, everything's over if they don't come back? What's the problem? And if I keep thinking about this, what Ralph is not saying is he's worried that if they don't come back, that's it for the conch. Meaning the conch is his power. That's how he got people on his side. That's basically like the thing that their rules all come out from. And he realizes in this moment, even though he doesn't quite say it to Piggy, I think, that if he did blow the conch, they're just going to ignore it. And the minute that they ignore it and nothing happens to them, then nobody will ever listen to Ralph again. He'll stop being the chief, even if he has the title. And I think it's interesting that Ralph doesn't quite say that. He's, clearly implying it, but he's not spelling it out for Piggy because I think he's nervous. He's really nervous that this is a moment where maybe his authority isn't what he thought it was or hoped it was. And so by stopping myself and asking this question and trying to kind of fill in the blanks for what Ralph might have said if he was a little bit more specific with Piggy, there's some interesting ideas here about this scene. So now if I go to this chart here, you'll see I'm looking for two things. One is this technique by the author, and the other is the central idea. So for the New York Regents, that's one of the things that we constantly have to do, right? Which is read a text, explain some tool that the author uses to create an idea, and then explain how it creates this idea. So what I've done here is say Golding, the author of Lord of the Flies, uses dialogue to show Ralph's anxiety about what will happen if the choir boys start ignoring the authority of the conch. In particular, what he doesn't say shows us more than what he does say. So the fact that he doesn't quite tell Piggy how afraid he seems to be to me in this moment really shows us something. What does it show me? Well, in my idea, it means that power really depends on people agreeing that you have power. If enough people reject your power and ignore your attempts to wield it, it might be gone. So I think I can argue that idea is here because I think Ralph realizes that he's not powerful just because of who he is or what he does. He kind of has figured out this really interesting way with the conch to command power. But because everything depends on the conch, as soon as they realize that the conch isn't some magical thing, it's just kind of arbitrary, it's just kind of random, then his power becomes random and he doesn't have it. So I'm able to take the scene, question it, ask what's not said, fill in the blanks a bit, use that to get to this technique, and use that to get to this central idea. Sometimes, though, it's really hard to know what's not said. Obviously, the invisible is much more difficult to analyze than the visible. But what I'm saying is you got to find moments where things are kind of weird or odd. In this sense, it doesn't make sense to me that Piggy would tell him to blow the conch and he would say no. Piggy's always kind of smart and has good ideas, so why is Ralph so against it in that moment? So that's like a red flag for me. But sometimes one of the best ways to understand when to ask questions is to use poetry as a kind of guide, because poetry can be pretty weird. Poetry can be pretty almost random feeling and lead to lots of questions. And if we train ourselves to ask questions through poetry, we might be able to apply this to longer texts. So I'm giving you this poem here, which is really short but really odd, famously short. This poem is only 3 stanzas. Not much really goes on in it, yet it's still read almost 100 years later. It's got its own Wikipedia page and everything. And I'm going to read it here. So as I read it, try and ask, what's going on? What are the questions you would ask? So the poem is This Is Just a Say by William Carlos Williams. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. That's it. Guy ate someone's plums. What's going on here? How do we talk about this 100 years after it's written? How do we write essays on this? So here are my questions as I was reading this. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, which means the refrigerator, which you were probably saving for breakfast. So my first question here is like, who's the you in this? The author doesn't tell us. We don't know who the characters are, but we know there's an I and there's a you. And I'm assuming it's got to be a spouse. The author is not the same as necessarily the speaker, but this is a guy, so maybe it's the speaker is a man and it's his wife. So the guy left for work early or something and wanted breakfast. Maybe the wife is still asleep. That could be a really sexist assumption, but what can I tell you? Um, so he leaves a note. I ate your food. Nothing here tells me that outright. I'm just guessing and I'm questioning. But then he asks for forgiveness for eating the food. But there's something about this that hits me wrong. Is he really sorry? Because there's something about this almost sarcastic. Like when I read it, forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. Like that's when I'm not really sorry. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry I ate your food. It was so good. Doesn't sound sorry to me. So so this is kind of just like a what's going on here question. But this is more an interpretive question like is he really sorry? Is he being sarcastic? And I can start to figure out what this poem might be about just by asking these questions. So literally, yeah, it might be this is just a poem about a person leaving a note for their spouse saying that they ate their breakfast and they're sorry. But it might be a poem about someone who's not really sorry, who is happy they did it, not necessarily because they hate their spouse secretly. I don't see anything like that there, but just because the food was really, really good. They were tempted to eat it, and they're just kind of, almost kind of proud that they did eat it, I guess. I don't know. So, what do I do with this? I'm focusing in on that last stanza. There's something about the wording that suggests the speaker's not sorry. That just stands out to me as weird. Why say sorry and then say something like this, which doesn't seem sorry at all? And so the speaker says something that's the opposite of the speaker. And if I was going to get technical about it, you don't need to because we're not really going over poetic terms, but there's consonance going on here, which is like alliteration. You know, you can see alliteration so sweet, the S and the S, but there's also this delicious, you see an S sound. So it's basically, even if it's not starting the word, there's that same sound repeated. So sweet, so cold, delicious. They were delicious, so sweet and so cold. It's that repetition that, I don't know, it just gives me this sense of like he's happy he did it. But what does that mean? What's the central idea here? And I can tell you, people have some wide range of interpretations of this poem. It could just be that the poem is about like this one little moment in life. And sometimes the things you're tempted with are really good and make you happy. It could be about relationships. I've seen people say this is about like Adam and Eve and the Bible, because that's the story where Eve is tempted by the fruit that God said don't eat. And whenever you see someone eating fruit they weren't supposed to eat, it's got to be referencing that. It could be. And I start to ask questions now like, if it really is about Adam and Eve, it is kind of interesting to think of Eve eating the fruit and putting a note on the tree for God saying, like, hey, I'm sorry, you told me not to eat it, but it was so good. What would happen if she did that? Um, and so then I have to ask, why is this guy doing that if we can't even think of Eve doing something like that? So there's so many questions here. And this is just 3 stanzas. The questions lead us to these real interesting thoughts. And the thoughts, we have to ask where they're coming from. It's obviously coming from something the author did, something that made me think that this guy's not really sorry. That produces the idea. You're on your own for this. I want you to come up with the idea. And that's the real, difficult work. Look at my example from Lord of the Flies. Look at what I've given you here. Now come up with it on your own. Fill in this chart. If you're just watching this video, I'll put something in the description. If you're in my class, though, we're going to talk about it in class. So before class, though, definitely finish the chart, bring it to class, and then we're going to work on it more tomorrow or whenever we do. I'll see you in class.